I am constantly reminded in both trading and life that it's not so much about learning new things to do, it's about just implementing the things that we already know we should be doing. And this relates so well to trading. You see, I'll scroll through social media every single day and I'll see all kinds of new influencers, especially ICT influencers. I'm sorry, ICT crowd, but I gotta say it, of guys that are just overcomplicating things so much. It's insane. I have no idea what turtle soup is, but I see this stuff on my Twitter feed and it makes absolutely no sense. And I just had enough of it. I passed my prop firm challenges. I made enough money to live off of them full time by keeping it absolutely simple. Now, I don't blame you if you are in the stage of complicating things. If you're in the middle of the midwit meme where, at the very beginning you keep it simple, at the very end you keep it simple, in the middle it's just so complicated, because I was there. I thought I needed some secret weapon, some secret sauce, but because nobody does this, because nobody keeps it simple, perhaps that's actually why the simplicity is what works. And so in today's video, I want to relate that message to risk management specifically. I want to talk about what kind of risk management system I use to pass my prop firm challenges, how simple it actually is, and how you can implement it right after this video to literally become a better trader. It's a very actionable video, so let's get into it. Okay, backing it up to 2021, I took my very first FTMO challenge, and at the time, the prop firm industry was completely different. It was so different. One main difference is that there were still 30-day time limits. If you're new to the industry, you have no idea what I'm talking about, consider yourself blessed, because it was tough to make 10% in 30 days. That's part of why I launched Lark Funding in 2022, because I thought that was absolutely insane. But passing those challenges in 2022, really you had to think very methodically and very mindfully about how you were going to approach risk, because let's face it, if you're making 10% in 30 days, you're gambling, you're risking a lot. And so I had to think about how I would approach this challenge to kind of limit my risk while also giving myself a chance to pass. Because face it, if you're risking 0.5% per trade, I don't care how good of a trader you are, you're never actually going to hit that 10% in 30 days. And so I came to realize that to limit my downside, what I needed to do was to adopt somewhat of a dynamic risk approach. And that meant that I was still comfortable risking 1% per trade, which I really think is the sweet spot, risking 1% per trade and then increasing the risk over time. So because there was that 30-day time limit, what I did was I risked 1% until I went all the way up to 3%. At that point, when I was up 3%, I increased my risk to 2.5%. What that meant was, if it was a losing trade, I would be back to essentially break even or a little bit of profit. I was still fine. I was completely fine, because if you remember back then, as long as you finished the challenge up, as long as you were in profit, you'd get a free reset. So you were still in the sweet spot. However, if you risked 2.5% while being up 3%, I always went for a minimum risk reward of 1-to-1. It meant that at a bare minimum, if it was a winning trade, I was going to be up 5.5% total. Now, I don't do math in public, so if that's wrong, don't shame me, but roughly 5.5% I would be up. At that point, I would increase my risk further. So again, needing a minimum risk to reward of 1-to-1, I would risk, again, this was roughly 3 years ago, once I was up 5.5%, I think I would risk 4%, because I'd gain a minimum of 4%, which would get me, or I'd risk 4.5%, which would get me over the sweet spot, which meant really I could pass in 5 trades, which I think I did once, maybe max twice. I'm not trying to fake flex on you. Again, I'm not some insane trader, but that dynamic risk worked really well. And that's really option 1 for this video, the lesson here of using that dynamic risk approach. Now, if I were to take a challenge today without time limits, I'm not sure if that's something that I would implement, because yes, there are no time limits, which is nice, but just personally, I prefer the more steady Eddie chip away at the goal, right? It takes time to get to 3%. And then if every time you're at 3%, you risk 2.5%, and you have a few losing trades in a row, you could be at it for a really long time, right? You go back down to break even, up to 3%, back to break even, so on and so forth. It can get a little bit discouraging, whereas if you just continue to risk 1% along the way, it's a little bit more steady, it's a little bit more consistent, and I think that's personally what I would like. But that is really the first system that I use to pass my prop firm challenges. Okay, so now because 2024, we no longer have time limits, what is the best approach? Is it the one that I just mentioned, the dynamic risk approach, or something different? So again, relating it to what I would do if I was taking a prop firm challenge today, because I like the steady, consistent approach, I would risk 1% per trade. However, before you click away thinking, oh, this is just a useless video, I think there is something that you can implement today that I implemented that could immediately double, triple, quadruple your pass rate. Now, it is boring. Most lessons on this channel, spoiler alert, are boring, but they are effective. At least they were for me. So listen, risking 1% I think is still the sweet spot. I often risked 0.5% on my challenge, but that's just because I'm very conservative and I had already had a couple of funded accounts at that point. But listen, here is the lesson. I think reducing your risk in half when you are in drawdown completely changes the game. I think anybody watching this can have a 100% pass rate. You can pass every single prop firm challenge that you take if you just cut your risk in half when you are in drawdown. Now, if you're risking 10% a trade, the first one's a loser, and you're now risking 5% a trade, no, that doesn't apply. But if you're risking 1% and you cut it down to 0.5%, you're good to go. Now, some of you might be watching this and saying, oh, it's a waste of time. I'd rather just blow my money, start over from scratch. That is you. That is totally fine. I think that's a little bit more of a gamified approach, right? The idea of let me spend $1,000 in challenges to make $1,100 in payouts, to each their own. But I truly think you should only sign up for a challenge once you are consistently profitable, once you have an edge, which means that if you cut your risk in half to 0.5% when you're in drawdown, it's going to be essentially impossible for you to blow that challenge. Because if you run the numbers with your statistics, put it into a simulator, for my statistics with roughly a 60% win rate, I'd have to lose 20 trades in a row to blow the challenge. And even at that point, the probability of that happening was so low. I think it was less than a 1% chance. And so I think just cutting your risk in half can make a major difference. And this brings us to another important point that I don't see anybody else talk about. See, prop firms, they are addictive, all right? The idea of making huge money from prop firms, it's very attractive. It's very addictive, but it really muddies the waters a little bit. As a trader myself, you get a little bit caught up in the potential rather than the hard work that you actually need to implement. You can get carried away very easily. I know I did. When I had my first funded account, you name it, I was online. I was shopping for cars, for watches, for all kinds of nonsense stuff that I didn't even want, I didn't even need, but I'm sure you've been there, you've done it. And so it's important to remember when it comes to prop firms that for me, the number one goal was not to pass. You might think, oh, that's surprising. I'm signing up for a challenge. I want to pass. Of course you want to pass, but for me, my number one goal was not to pass because listen, in 2021, when I spent $700 or so on a 100K challenge, that was a month's worth of rent for me. And I only had a year's worth of expenses saved up. If I didn't make it in trading, I was going back to getting a job and I was not going to let that happen, which means that my number one priority was actually to protect my capital. Secondary goal was to pass, but the first one was to protect the capital that I invested into that challenge. Now, remember, the number one goal in investing, I think this is a Warren Buffett quote, it's not verbatim, but the rough idea is that the number one rule in investing is to not lose money, right? Sure, second one is to make money, but the first one is to not lose money. And it's the same thing with prop firm challenges. You should only sign up for a challenge once you are consistent, once you are profitable, once you have an edge, once you know what you are doing. You'll make your life so much easier. So rather than falling down the rabbit hole of prop firms too soon, which is what everybody wants. I mean, this is coming from me who owns a prop firm, but I'm telling you, wait until you are consistent. Wait until you know what it is that you are doing. Protect the capital that you invested. That was the most valuable thing that I could do because it shifted my focus so much. I was able to be patient because I shifted my goal. I was able to wait for the A+ setups. I was able to trade the higher time frames, and that made the biggest difference for me. So first off, we have the dynamic risk approach. That's what I took because there were 30-day time limits. I don't know if I would implement that today, but it's something interesting to brainstorm, to consider, to look into. Secondly, we have the 1% risk approach. I think this is still the golden echelon. It's still the main framework that traders use that I think works well. But most importantly, when in drawdown, cut your risk in half. That's what I did. That's how I passed 100% of my prop firm challenges. And lastly, if you're trying to, I would like to think of it as taking the professional approach. It's about protecting your capital first and getting on the offense second. So protect your capital and focus on passing Secondly, if you have any questions, drop them down below. If you are ready to get funded, we have all kinds of competitive programs down below. We have introduced a whole bunch of new features, but the only 3-step program worth taking with targets of 5%, 4%, 3%. If you breach your daily drawdown limit and you still have gains, we'll pay you those gains. We have no news restrictions, and we just introduced a payout guarantee. Tons of firms like to throw around the word guarantee, but they don't actually back it up with anything. We've been processing payouts for over 2 years. Our payout record speaks for itself, but our new Lark payout guarantee means we will pay you an extra $500 if you don't receive your payout within 24 hours. That is a limited time special feature that we are giving to you as a trader. So if you're ready to become a Lark trader, sign up down below. See you in the next one. Until then, peace.